Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with the hottest in budget deck technology. And for today's deck tech, we are continuing our deep dive through Tarkir Dragonstorm as we now highlight yet another one of the clans that lives on the plane. So, without further ado, join me today in the Explorer format for a deck that's trying to go wide and maybe even big at the same time. This is Mardu Mobilize. Longtime viewers of the channel know how we do it. We have to talk about the stats of the deck before we dive right in. So our Mardu deck, as the name suggests, is going to be white, black, and red. You're looking at an average mana curve of about 1.8, and we'll be rocking 20 creatures, 12 instants, 4 sorceries, 8 artifacts, 4 enchantments, and 20 lands. As the name suggests, we're going to be utilizing the brand new Mobilize mechanic that was introduced to us from Tarkir Dragonstorm under the Mardu Clan. We're going to try to go as wide as possible and as fast as we can to just make a ton of tokens and just aggressively keep hitting our opponent. The only downside, of course, is these tokens don't stay on the battlefield for very long, so we are going to try to also cast a couple of other spells that could put some more permanent tokens out onto the battlefield. To provide a little backup support for those tokens that do appear and have to get sacrificed, we're going to throw out a couple of key enchantments that'll help ping out our opponent, buff up those tokens, and also possibly even drain our opponent out as we keep our life total nice and high. But you may be asking yourself right now, how is it possible to pull off such a cheap little strategy on a small budget of only 12 rares?
Good question.
Well, I'm glad you asked, so let's not waste any more time and let's talk about how this deck is supposed to work. Starting in the 1-drop slot with our creatures, we'll utilize here Mardu Devotee, Nesting Bot, and Clockwork Percussionist. The Devotee here is actually a really good card for us. While it may not seem very synergistic, when it enters, you get to scry 2, but ideally this allows us to fix our mana however we need to by using its one and only ability here. Although it can only use it once per turn, that's all we need sometimes to just cast what we need to on time. And of course we'll have 2 key artifacts here, Nesting Bot and Clockwork Percussionist. Both of them do early game damage, and both of them can replace each other with some extra utility. With the Nesting Bot, if it dies, it leaves behind a servo token, which again is what we need. We want to have tokens on the battlefield as fast as possible. Although Clockwork Percussionist may not provide a token for us when it dies, however, it allows us to exile the top card of our library, which we can utilize to then play that card until the end of our next turn. However, in order to utilize the Mobilize ability, our 2, 3, and 4-drop slots are devoted to creatures that help with that. So, Voice of Victory here is a really awesome card for us. It has Mobilize 2, in other words, it makes 2 warrior creature tokens. However, our opponent cannot cast spells during our turn as long as the Voice of Victory is on the battlefield. Dalkevin Pack Beast here is also a great card. It has Mobilize 3, so it'll give us 3 warrior creature tokens, and it also has Vigilance. While the Pack Beast may not have any actual attack power, its defense allows it to hopefully swing without having to worry about dealing with too much damage when our opponent blocks. And then finally, to give all of our warrior tokens and any other tokens we have Death Touch, we will utilize here Bone Karen Butcher here, a 4-mana 4/4 demon with Mobilize of 2. Going over the non-creature spells, we want to take advantage of all the tokens we can in a variety of ways. So, with our temporary tokens, we could sacrifice one of them utilizing Corrupted Conviction here. This instant allows us to draw 2 cards, and all we simply have to do is sacrifice a creature. Since all of our warriors are temporary anyway, this is a perfect card for us to keep churning through our deck. If we want to put out there more tokens onto the battlefield, we can then utilize Gleeful Demolition. This will give us 3 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens. All we have to do, however, is destroy one of our own artifacts. But if you don't need to do that, it's still a great 1-drop for us to destroy enemy artifacts if we need to in a pinch. To create for us instant speed tokens, we'll utilize copies of Raise the Alarm here, allowing us to create 2 1 white soldier creature tokens, and also one of our other more key cards here, Frontline Rush. This card, however, I want to talk about specifically because it has 2 awesome abilities. So, Frontline Rush here is a 2-mana instant that reads, you can choose one of these abilities, either create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, or target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures we control. So this can be a great way to give one of our creatures a big pump to make it go super big, hopefully close out the game, or if we really just need to, on a pinch, we can just make a bunch of tokens to keep our game plan going. To round out our whole package, we're going to then have some additional support in the 3-drop slot with some enchantments. So we will have first off here, Bastion of Remembrance. This is actually great because it also creates a token for us. However, anytime a creature we control dies, we can drain our opponent for 1 life and regain 1 life. This is perfect for stabilization and taking advantage of all those temporary tokens we have. But we are still an aggro deck, and we do need to attack in order to utilize the Mobilize ability. So we will also add in copies of War Leader's Call here, a 3-mana enchantment that allows all of our creatures to get +1/+1 pump, and also whenever a creature we control enters, this enchantment will deal 1 damage to each opponent. So if we have ideally out both the War Leader's Call and the Bastard Remembrance, you'll get some damage on your opponent when our tokens appear, and also they'll do damage when they do get sacrificed. As far as our mana base is concerned, it's going to be as simple as can be, but we do have a little bit of extra wiggle room since we do have some extra rares to play with. Either way, it's going to be 5 plains, 3 swamps, and 4 mountains. We have a little bit of space, as I just mentioned right now, for a Concealed Courtyard, a Blackleaf Cliffs, Inspiring Vantage, and also we have a tap land in Nomad Outpost here, but this does fix our mana to what we need. And because we are utilizing a lot of tokens, we'll also bring in a single copy of Fountain Port. Now, if you do want to take this deck into best of 3, here's what I would recommend for you for your current sideboard. So Fatal Push is going to be your best catch-all removal spell, and it works perfectly well with all the tokens we do have to get sacrificed. We'll use copies of Mardu Charm here. Does great because, of course, it could either do some damage to an opponent's creature, create some tokens for us with First Strike, or we can use at instant speed a chance to remove one of their key cards from their hand. For our Graveyard Hate here, we'll also utilize Soul Guide Lantern as our catch-all removal, and then for Artifact and Enchantment Hate, we'll throw in copies of Fracture, which also can hit Planeswalkers if we need to in a pinch. We'll have extra copies, of course, of Bastard Remembrance and War Leader's Call, depending on what our opponent is throwing at us. And of course, one of our biggest banes of our existence is going to be life gain, so to stop that, we'll throw in copies of Tibble, Rakish Instigator to turn off their life gain, and also you can tick it down to create even more tokens that go great with our whole game plan. Now with the deck tech out of the way, here are the tips and tricks I can give you to get the most value out of your deck. If you're going to be on the play, ideally try to have that Nesting Bot or Clockwork Percussionist in hand so that way you can just start putting down immediate threats and start hitting your opponent as fast as possible. This also can help you lead into a bigger turn by turn 2 if you have a Gleeful Demolition in hand. By after doing your damage with your Nesting Bot or that Clockwork Percussionist, sacrifice them to the Gleeful Demolition and then put out there some tokens and start building up a board state, which will put much more pressure on your opponent. If your opponent is on the play and you have to draw, then you might want to have your Mardu Devotee instead. By anticipating whatever their land drop is, or if they even play a spell on that first turn, this can help you with the Mardu Devotee figure out exactly where you want to sculpt your hand with its Scry ability, as well as also mana fixing for your next couple of turns. If they're going to be holding onto a lot of stuff and keeping mana open, you might want to then just start producing a bunch of tokens at the beginning of their end step to make sure you can put pressure on them once you get to your upkeep. By the time we get to turns 3 and 4, you should have now enough tokens out there where you should be able to close out the game by hopefully turn 4 without much interruption. However, don't be afraid, of course, to sacrifice a couple of those extra tokens for value, which are Corrupted Conviction, if you do need to draw into more action, or if you're anticipating your opponent is going to possibly wrath your board. This, of course, does lead me to one of the biggest advantages to the deck, which is your token production is very flexible in this deck. You have a lot of instant speed options, you do have some sorcery speed options, and you do have creature-based options to keep producing a lot of stuff and applying more and more pressure to your opponent. So don't be afraid to be aggro once you have a wide enough board state, even if your opponent has a couple of key creatures that may kind of hinder your game plan. If you do anticipate that they have big creatures out there that may stop some of your key creatures, such as their Voice of Victory from swinging, Dalkavan, Pack Beast, or Bone Karen, then you might want to hold on to that frontline rush, and instead of utilizing its ability to make tokens, use the secondary ability to give one of your creatures a bit of extra pump to push through the remaining points of damage, or just to get that bigger creature out of the way when you give one of your other creatures an extra push of pump. And the other biggest advantage this deck has is, with the token production that we have, we don't care if our tokens live or die.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
But with the abilities that we have on the field, with War Leader's Call out, we can keep mobilizing and keep creating more tokens, which will then ping out our opponent, and they'll be a little bit tougher to deal with because they'll have a stronger attack power. On the other hand, if you have the Bastard Remembrance out, you can still be aggro. Even when your tokens do get sacrificed, they'll just ping out our opponent by draining them out, and hopefully will stabilize with a little bit of extra life to keep this process up until you win. This now, however, leads us to the major weaknesses of the deck, and that comes in 3 major pieces. The first one, of course, is key spot removal for your mobilized creatures. Any of your creatures that can get stopped from swinging and doing their attacks by putting out all those tokens will make us feel very sad. This leads us to another sub-issue with the deck. If we can't swing at all, maybe because we have a creature on the field that we just cannot swing into because we will lose more than we gain, then that's also going to be something that makes us feel a little sad. Your Voice of Victory is also probably one of the #1 targets your opponent is going to try to take out, because as soon as that is out, they'll have, again, access to utilizing their removal at instant speed on our turn. But the other major weakness of the deck, and it's a pretty obvious one, is Wraths make us very sad. As wide as we can go, if your opponent can time a good Wrath that blows up the whole board, we'll feel, of course, like our deck can't do anything. This is to a degree why we have the Bastion of Remembrance to punish opponents that are a little wrath heavy by draining them out and gaining some life by hopefully providing us another turn or two to hopefully rebuild the board state. However, the most popular removal right now tends to be in the exile category, and if our stuff gets exiled, such as with Sunfalls or Farewells, then your deck doesn't even get the triggers off of that, and that's definitely when your deck feels like it can't do anything. So just be mindful of those weaknesses. Now, if you do like what the deck is trying to do and you've made it this far into the video, please leave a shout out below because you are my true fiery friends, and I'm about to show you right now how you can take this deck to the next level with a little extra investment to make it even better than it currently is. But before we continue, if you do like any of the content that I do, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you watch the content. You can support me monthly for a small amount on Patreon, where I have all of my extended bonus footage posted. We also have a Redbubble spot where you can buy merch like stickers and shirts, or for free, all you can just do also is just join our growing community on Discord. Your support helps keep this channel going. All links are in the details below. As far as upgrades where we can go, here's what I would recommend for you to take the deck to the next level. We're going to actually utilize now Stadium Headliner here as our replacement for Mardu Devotee, mostly because, again, if you're upgrading the deck, you should be able to afford now another extra creature here that also has the mobilize ability and will help our deck streamline itself and be a lot more focused on an aggro package. Honestly, you don't really need to change much of anything else in the deck in terms of creatures. Everything's pretty solid as is. However, we will move now the Bastion of Remembrance now to the sideboard, and in the main deck we're just going to focus on War Leader's Call so we could just be as aggro as possible and put out there some extra damage with the extra rares we can invest. And our other main upgrade for the deck is going to be Zurgo Thunder's Decree here. Of course, being the leader of Mardu, he has to be in the deck itself, but since we're focusing now completely on warrior creature tokens, this will help us out because every one of our creature tokens cannot be sacrificed, which is great for us, although this does kind of maybe awkwardly go against the Corrupted Conviction. But remember, you do have other regular creatures you can sacrifice if you need to, such as your Clockwork Percussionist again, the Nesting Bot. Even if you need to in a pinch, even Stadium Headliner can be perfectly fine for sacrifice. As far as investing into the land base, this is again, we're going to get a major overhaul and lots of improvements for us. We're going to have Castle Ardvale, Hive of the Eye Tyrant, and Castle Embrith. The Embrith can then pump up our creatures even further. The Castle Ardvale can help us make more tokens in a pinch, and Hive of the Eye Tyrant here as at least another creature land that can also be an exiling effect for our opponent's graveyard. This means we'll trim down, of course, on the mountains, the swamps, and the plains, and then we'll make room for a little extra for the dual lands. Since we're going to be running a low curve, we'll still add in extra copies of Concealed Courtyard, Blackleaf Cliffs, and Inspiring Vantage. Only a single copy, however, of the Triome if we need it, mostly because we don't want any tap lands in our main mana base for an aggro deck. But again, one is actually pretty good for us if we need it in a pinch. And of course, keep the Fountain Port because that card is just so good for our deck and really nice and synergistic. As far as upgrading the sideboard, you actually don't really need to do much of anything. I did mention earlier the Bastion of Remembrance will now get moved over here, and War Leader's Call, of course, goes into the main deck. But the only other major upgrade I can recommend for you will be Roiling Vortex. This is actually really solid for us because we could slowly put more pressure on our opponent, as this card will ping out our opponent bit by bit. Also, we can turn off life gain shenanigans in instant speed anytime we want to, just to make sure our opponents don't get too cheeky with their game plan. And with that all out of the way, here are my final thoughts that I want to give on this deck. I love the mobilize mechanic, and it goes very well, and it's surprisingly a very diverse mechanic depending on how you build your decks. I know we haven't had the time to finish up the remaining clans of Tarkir. Don't worry, we will, but this is most likely going to be the clan I would stick to for the remainder of the time we're on this plane. But to put this another way, if you're a fan of token strategies, if you're a fan of a deck that can go wide or go big, and if you're a fan of the ability to sacrifice things for value and kind of out-tempo your opponent with a couple of key cards, then I would definitely say, give this deck a try. And I assure you, when you manage to amass a giant army of tokens that can overwhelm your opponent, you're going to have a lot of fun doing so, and you'll be very surprised about how you can pull this off on a budget. And I assure you, you will definitely not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later!